Back when I first started my channel in 2015, I used to do a lot of movie reviews, like way more than I do now. And I always had to make sure that I had a t-shirt to wear in the video. But back in 2016, I was at Disneyland Paris and found this t-shirt right here. At that time, they had just announced Indiana Jones 5 was on the way, and I was like, man, I am getting this t-shirt, I am wearing it in that review. Little did we know the movie was gonna be delayed a bunch of times, and I'd be sitting here reviewing the damn thing in 2023. But you know what? I finally cracked the t-shirt out, I'm wearing it, I'm gonna get my money's worth. You guys can see it from every single angle. It's a bloody good t-shirt. How good is that? Very nice, it catches the light really well. That's awesome. All right, I've worn that enough to write it off on tax. Also, Disney gave us these awesome hats at the preview screening last night, so I'm gonna wear that one as well. It's gonna be a real special review. Let's get into it. You know what? We're gonna lose the hat. Finding himself in a new era, approaching retirement, Indiana Jones wrestles with fitting into a world that seems to have outgrown him. But as the tentacles of an all-too-familiar evil return in the form of an old rival, Indy must don his hat and pick up his whip once more to make sure an ancient and powerful artifact doesn't fall into the wrong hands. So we're finally here, Indiana Jones 5, The Dial of Destiny. He's finally arriving in cinemas. This is a movie that I've been hotly anticipating, sort of cautiously. The original trilogy are some of my favorite movies of all time. They are movies that I grew up with. They were amongst like that first group of just action adventure movies that I fell in love with when I was young, and I would have on constant rotation alongside the likes of Star Wars and Back to the Future, all of those kind of movies I just absolutely adored growing up. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is actually, until this point, the only Indiana Jones movie that I opened in my lifetime. I remember being so excited to see that movie. In fact, I've still got my cinema cup right here from when I saw it. And then I walked out of that movie just so disappointed, like so disappointed, shattered. I've recently revisited Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and if you haven't watched it in a while, it has actually aged pretty well. There's a lot of dumb stuff in it, but it's actually not as bad as I remember it being. That said, yeah, I was cautiously optimistic about going into this one. That last movie soured me for so long. Steven Spielberg dropped out of this film a number of years ago as well, so this is the first Indy film where he's not in the director's chair. But of course James Mangold is there, so on one hand I'm a bit woozy, like, oh no Spielberg. On the other hand I'm like, oh, James Mangold, pretty decent choice. He's done some great movies. And you know, we're coming at this 15 years down the line, fresh slate, coming into this, nice and new, and you know, they kept promising us that they're gonna go back to basics and make this like a traditional indie adventure, so I was on board. So all that being said, Dial of Destiny is pretty much everything that we were promised. This is a fairly traditional Indiana Jones movie. We're stripping back to the basics. We've gone more back to that kind of action, adventure, pulp inspiration that the original movies kind of, you know, drew from. There are, of course, in true indie style, a few little twists and turns of kind of more outlandish ideas that are played upon here, but I do feel like, and I'm not going to go into that because I don't want to spoil your experience with this film. These movies, I think, have always defied expectations, and they've always gone just a little bit further than what you perhaps expect as you're watching the film. So I'm not going to spoil any of that, but it does, you know, reach out into some pretty outlandish territory, but I think it handles it very well. I think it handles it much better than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did, and I found myself really enjoying this movie, like from beginning to end. This did feel like a traditional Indiana Jones adventure. It's got a really great story, like Indy getting back into the hat and the leather jacket and whatever, and going off on a globe-trotting adventure with an array of weird and wacky side characters, some new, some old, just like every one of the classic indie movies would do. Mix that cast up a little bit, and there's some terrific action scenes in here as well. I know there's a scene floating around online that they released, a really kind of weird, wacky, over-the-top kind of comic scene, and out of context, it seems just very odd. In context in the movie, it works very well, and it's just like, that whole sequence is awesome, and it's just really traditional indie action set pieces. I thought it was great. My biggest issue with this movie is that it's just too long. Every movie these days is 2.5 hours long. Movies do not need to be 2.5 hours long. It feels like ever since Endgame and Infinity War proved that audiences will go to a cinema in droves to watch a 2.5, 3 hour movie, every single big blockbuster has been 2.5, 3 hours. We rarely got 2.5, 3 hour movies before then, and now it's just everything. The greatest thing about the original Indy movies is that they're short. I mean, they range anywhere between like an hour and 45 minutes and just over 2 hours. And I rewatched those movies recently, well, just this past week, for the first time in what must have been about maybe 5 or 6 years. I hadn't watched these movies for a long time. And it struck me just how fast-paced these things are. They move so damn quick. There is something happening at every single moment. There's not a lot of moments where the story kind of just stops and just rests and feels sluggish. The original movies do not have that. There are, you know, a few moments in those original films where they stop to give you like exposition heavy dialogue, but there's always something happening that makes the movie just feel like it's still moving at this kind of breakneck, really brisk speed. And that's something that those movies did very well, and something that Steven Spielberg is so efficient with in all of his storytelling. He knows how to get straight to the point and just how to tell a really sufficient story without any padding. I feel like Dial of Destiny, and I don't know if I could blame this on James Mangold. I feel like this might be something that studio mandated or something, that this movie needs to be long. When the action kicks in and there's like stuff going on, everything, all the classic indie stuff is there. And it's moving at a really great speed, but then it slows down. And the movie just, in the middle, it just feels like there's so much padding. But like the pace is just so slow. Like everything is just moving far, far slower than it should. And it feels like it just kind of impedes on that viewing experience of the movie. You want this thing to just move. This movie's just too long. And when you see it, I think you'll see the difference between this and even Crystal Skull. For all its flaws, that movie is just absolutely over the top, bombastic from beginning to end. But there are great character moments in here, and I think some of that is warranted. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to catch up on. There's a lot of really great nods to the past movies and past characters, perhaps characters that didn't return for this one for one reason or another. We get explanations, and we get a lot of background padding to even Indy and his relationships with the other characters from the other movies or whatever. And we get a lot of this padding, and I think that's all great, but it does impede on the experience to a point in the way that they kind of that they handle it. Again, though, when this movie works, it is an absolutely exhilarating, epic action adventure. It kicks off with one of the greatest opening sequences in any Indiana Jones movie. It is a flashback, we've all seen it in the trailers, flashback to World War II, 1940s. Actually struck me interesting when I rewatched the movies that we never actually saw Indy in the war. Like as a kid, you see the Nazis and all that stuff and you think, oh yeah, World War II, but no, this is like, these movies like pre-war, late 1930s. This opening sequence, a few flashbacks throughout the movie give us that opportunity to finally see Indy in World War II, fighting the Nazis in like a battle during the war. They've of course used that de-aging, CGI de-aging stuff, deep fake, whatever you want to call it. They've used that on Indy. It's really good. Like the technology is really great. I feel like I've had qualms with how they've used it in the past. I think they use it so cheaply in Mandalorian and like the Disney Plus shows. I think they've used it really well here and it looks great. Like, there's a few little bits and pieces here and there that just looks a little bit wonky, whether that's the mouth looks a little uncanny valley or something like that. But for the most part, it's actually very good and it feels very seamless and it feels very real. You only really get taken out of it when Indy speaks and it's 80-odd-year-old Harrison Ford speaking out of like 40-year-old Harrison Ford's body, and that takes you out of it a little bit. But other than that, it's done very well, and the whole opening sequence is really cool. And we get to see Indy do some really cool stuff that we've never seen him before. And the technology of today has really allowed to expand that scope of storytelling. In some respects, that kind of feels like it might go against the franchise a little bit because those original films were just so tangible. Everything was real. It was done with sets. It was done with miniatures, all that kind of stuff. And then bringing modern day technology into it does kind of maybe make it feel like it's less of a kind of a B-movie pulp and it more of like a 2023 blockbuster. And I think that too maybe is one of my qualms about this, is stylistically it feels a little bit off as well. Disregarding that kind of little minor qualm, the opening sequence is great, it is really cool, and the finale of the movie is awesome too. I won't go into that because it's like heavy spoiler territory, but really cool finale of the movie. It does some weird stuff, it goes in some directions that you simply do not expect. Also a great hallmark of the Spielberg Indiana Jones movies is the great wit that they have. I mean, I never really realized until recently, and Spielberg has been my favorite filmmaker forever, like forever, ever. But it hasn't been until maybe the last handful of years where I realized how witty Spielberg is, and whether that's in the dialogue or the way he directs his characters to perform the dialogue or just even like visual gags on the screen, he's just an impeccable master of comedy. I feel like that's missing a little bit from this movie. I feel like Mangold perhaps doesn't have his finger on the pulse of being able to do those visual gags or even directing perhaps more comedic performances. There are some funny lines and a bit of banter and stuff like that, but it's not to the same level. So I feel like between like the slower pace of the movie and the kind of dialed down wit, it does lose a little bit of that charm. So at best, the movie is really good. It's really enjoyable. At its, I won't say at its worst, at its not so best, it's too slow. It's a bit sluggish. But they're my only kind of issues. Harrison Ford back as Indy is awesome. You can just tell he wants to be there. He loves this character. He didn't want to be there for Star Wars. That's why they killed off Han Solo. Harrison Ford wanted Han Solo to get killed off in like Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. He never wanted to come back to Star Wars. That was it. He was done. And then when he came back for the sequel trilogy, he said, guys, kill me off. I'm out. I'm never coming back. I don't care. You know that he loves Han Solo, and I'm sure he has like a deep appreciation for Star Wars and what it means to him in his career, whatever. But Indy is his baby. He loves Indy, and you can just tell there is just a different spark in his performance. I think there's always been a different spark between Indiana Jones and Han Solo, but particularly if you compare what Harrison does in this film to what he did in Force Awakens, which was really just, give me that money, let me do one more and I'm out of here. Harrison, once he's got the hat on and the costume on and everything, he just feels at home. And he delivers such a great performance here. And it's classic Indy. Of course, Phoebe Waller-Bridge we've got here in the new leading role. She's the new Indiana Jones girl, if you want to call her that. She's feisty, she's quick-witted, she is unexpected. You don't quite know what she's doing half the time, and she's great. I love Phoebe Waller-Bridge. She is so wonderful, and she brings just such a really nice magnetic energy to the movie. Her chemistry with Harrison Ford is great, and the way that her character and Indy play off each other is really great as well. At the end of the day, it's a good movie. I enjoyed this, I had a lot of fun with it. I did have a few issues, as I said, but it's not enough to completely just make me like loathe the film or not like it. This is fun, and it was fun to sit in a cinema and experience another Indiana Jones adventure, and what I feel like is the most traditional Indiana Jones film that has been released in my lifetime anyway. At that, I will be giving Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny a 3.5 out of 5. And at that, I want to know your thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny if you've had a chance to see it. If you haven't, what are your thoughts going into this? Are you excited for it, or are you a little bit hesitant like I was? As always, join the conversation down in the comments below.